The corrupt officers snapped handcuffs onto a black nurse's wrists in the middle of a VIP hospital corridor. And the Korean Mafia boss who stepped off the elevator recognized her immediately. She was his first love. The girl he had been using every resource in his empire to find for 9 years. And the woman who'd planted the watch, called the cops, and whispered in her ear that she'd never work again. In 72 hours, she'd have no company, no wealth, no social circle, and no way back. But that's not the part you need to see. You need to see the moment Seong-yun looked up and found her in chains. If you have ever believed that love doesn't die, that it only waits, buried and patient for the exact wrong moment to resurface, then stay right here, because this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. New Afro-Korean romance every single week. Now let's go back to where this all began. 3 hours. Before the handcuffs, Naeun-baek was moving through the VIP wing of Seohan Premier Medical Center, the way she moved through everything. Efficiently, quietly, with the particular grace of someone who has learned to be fully present in spaces that don't always acknowledge her. 6 years a registered nurse. 4 of them at Seohan, Seoul's most exclusive private hospital, where the silence was cultivated and the marble floors cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. She knew every corner of this floor, every pattern, every hierarchy, every unwritten rule. She was, by every metric that mattered to her, exceptionally good at her job. And she had no idea that everything she'd built was about to be attacked. Chairwoman Cho Hyun-suk arrived at 9:47 in the morning for a routine cardiac monitoring admission. 2 nights, precautionary. That's what the paperwork said. Within 20 minutes, she had sent her breakfast back twice, demanded the room temperature be lowered by exactly 2 degrees, not 1, not 3, and requested that a painting on the wall be removed because looking at it gave her a headache. Naeun handled all of this without expression. She had seen this kind of patient before. She knew the type. What she didn't know yet was how far this particular woman was willing to go. Then came the demand that would start everything. "I want this floor cleared," Cho Hyun-suk said. She was sitting propped against her pillows in a silk robe that cost more than Naeun's car, with the specific posture of someone who had been waited on for so long that entitlement had migrated into the spine. Naeun set down her chart. "I'm sorry?" "The other patients. I don't want them here. The foot traffic. The noise. Move them somewhere else." "Chairwoman Cho," Naeun said, keeping her voice precisely level. "There are 7 other patients currently admitted to this floor. 2 of them are in post-surgical recovery. I cannot relocate them. Their care and safety are not negotiable." The room changed temperature. Cho Hyun-suk turned toward her with the expression of a woman encountering something that shouldn't exist. "I didn't ask your opinion on what's negotiable." "That won't be possible," Naeun said. "Simple, final, immovable." Cho Hyun-suk smiled, thin, slow, dangerous. "You have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with." Naeun folded her hands in front of her. "I know exactly who you are, Chairwoman. It doesn't change my answer." That was the moment. The exact point at which a proud woman's pride cracked along a fault line, and everything else began to follow. 23 minutes later, Naeun was back at the nurse's station when her colleague Mi Kyung appeared at her elbow and said, barely above a whisper, "She called someone. 2 men came up in the service elevator. Not hospital personnel?" Naeun didn't look up. She finished the line she was typing. "Her staff?" "I think so. They've been in Suite 12 for 15 minutes. Naeun set down her stylus. Her instinct, the same one that had kept her grounded through 6 years of high-stakes scenarios, told her to document everything. Stay calm. Let the process work. She had barely finished the thought when Dr. Song called. "Nurse Baek." He had the voice of a man caught between his ethics and his mortgage. "Chairwoman Cho is reporting that a piece of personal jewelry has gone missing from her overnight bag. She's requesting that staff who accessed Suite 12 be held for questioning. Naeun's hands went still on the keyboard. On whose authority? She has a relationship with the hospital's board of directors. I need you to come to Suite 12. I'll be there, and I want this conversation documented. She walked back down that corridor with her head up. In the years since she had left Chicago and rebuilt herself in Seoul, finished her nursing degree in a second language, passed every certification on the first attempt, found her footing in a city that was not her own. She had faced harder things than a bitter woman with a grudge. She had faced her father's medical bills finally exceeding everything they had. She had faced booking a one-way flight to Seoul because staying meant standing still. She had built something real here, something entirely hers, and she was not going to let it be taken in a hospital corridor. What she walked into stopped her cold. Suite 12 had been arranged like a small theater. Cho Hyun-suk sat at its center. Her two visitors flanked her, not staff. Naeun confirmed that in one assessment. The specific blankness of men paid to be present and say nothing. And on the bedside table, laid out with almost theatrical care, a watch. An oval-faced, diamond-studded piece, glinting under the sweet lighting like an accusation. That's it, Cho Hyun-suk said. Found in her medical supply cart. Naeun looked at the watch. She looked at Cho Hyun-suk. She understood immediately and completely what was happening, and a cold, geological fury moved into her bones. Not the hot reactive kind, but the deep kind. The patient kind. That watch was not in my cart, Naeun said. I have two witnesses. Your witnesses arrived in the service elevator with you. Careful. The word was silk over something hard. I want Dr. Song present. I want the security footage from this suite reviewed. I want hospital legal counsel notified before anyone takes any further steps. Those are my conditions. Something moved across Cho Hyun-suk's face. Surprise, quickly dismantled. Then she picked up her phone. Never mind the hospital's process. I have my own. They were not real police. Naeun understood that in the first 20 seconds. The way they deferred to Cho Hyun-suk before the introductions were finished. The envelope that changed hands in the corridor outside the suite so openly it was almost contemptuous. Two officers in the correct uniforms with the wrong eyes, men who had learned that a badge was a more official-looking version of a threat. They didn't ask her questions. Real investigators ask questions. These men simply crossed to her and told her to turn around. On what grounds? Naeun said. Not a question. A statement. Suspected theft. You can come quietly or make this difficult. The cold metal closed around her wrists. She did not flinch. She was already composing the calls she would make. Her union representative, the hospital's patient advocacy office. She knew her rights. She had memorized them 2 years ago because a senior nurse had told her quietly that a nurse who doesn't know her rights has none. Then Cho Hyun-suk stepped close. Too close. Her heavy perfume filling the space between them. You should have moved the other patients, she said softly. Now you'll have a great deal of time to reflect on that. I'm going to make sure your nursing license is revoked in every jurisdiction where you hold it. I'm going to make certain no reputable medical facility in Korea will process your application. I have the connections. I have the patience, and I want you to know, specifically and clearly, that I will. The elevator at the end of the corridor opened. Cho Hyun-suk was mid-sentence, and then the air changed. Not a metaphor, there was a physical quality to it. A drop in something that wasn't temperature but registered the same way. That made every instinct for self-preservation fire simultaneously before the conscious mind had processed a single detail. The nurses at the station went still. Dr. Song took an involuntary half-step back. Naeun turned her head. And 11 years of careful architecture. The distance she had maintained. The deliberate not thinking. The way she had taught herself that certain doors, once closed, stay closed, came apart all at once, cleanly, like a structure that had been waiting for exactly this specific force, He was taller than she remembered. That was the first thing. And then immediately irrelevant as everything else arrived at once. The contained quality of him. The way he occupied space, not aggressively, but with absolute certainty. Dark suit built around him specifically. 11 men arranged in the geometry of long habit, the unconscious choreography of people who have been doing this long enough that it is reflex. He was speaking to the man on his right, low-voiced and unhurried. And then he looked up. Baek Seong-yoon. He looked at the corridor. He looked at the officers. He looked at Cho Hyun-suk. He looked at Na-yoon. He looked at the handcuffs. And in the 11-second window before his face locked back into composure, she saw everything she needed to see. Here's what you need to understand about these two. He had been 17 when her family moved away. She had been 15. They had been the kind of close that doesn't have a clean name. Not quite romantic. Not merely friends. Something in the territory between those things that only exists at that exact age when everything is still becoming. He'd been quiet in the way of someone who had learned early that drawing attention was dangerous. She had been the only one on their street who recognized the pattern. Because she had learned it too. They had been each other's one safe place in a neighborhood that didn't offer many. Then her father accepted a job offer in Atlanta. 2 weeks' notice. She'd stood outside his building at 6 a.m. with his number typed into a cracked phone screen, and for 3 weeks the number connected. And then it didn't. She had not forgotten him. Of course she had not forgotten him. But people build lives. People become other people. She had crossed an ocean, rebuilt herself, made something entirely her own. She had not allowed herself to think about what had become of the quiet boy from the fire escape. Now she understood exactly what he had become. The men, the suits, the way the space organized itself around him without anyone being instructed to make that happen. This was not the product of any ordinary institution. She knew how to read a room. This room was reading itself to her loud and clear. He moved. One small gesture. Almost nothing. The displacement of 2 fingers. And 12 men reorganized. 2 walked toward her with the unhurried efficiency of people confident in their instructions. The others redistributed themselves in ways that quietly enclosed the 2 officers and positioned Cho Hyun-suk between the corridor wall and several politely immovable men. The one who reached Na-yoon first was courteous. He could have been a hotel concierge. "Miss," he said, producing a small key. "My apologies for this." "That's evidence," one of the officers started. "You'll want to speak with your supervisor," the man said pleasantly. "Before you complete that statement. The security footage from Suite 12 has been reviewed. By several parties." The handcuffs came off. Na-yoon brought her wrists in front of her. She looked at the marks. She looked up. Seong-yoon was 12 feet away, watching her. The 11 years between them sat in the air with the particular quality of things that need to be addressed, but cannot be addressed here. Cho Hyun-suk had finally understood that something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what you've just—" "Chairwoman Cho." His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of force but its most efficient use. "I know exactly who you are." He let that sit in the air for exactly as long as it needed to. "We'll speak. Somewhere else." What happened over the next 72 hours, Na-yoon assembled in pieces, from financial news alerts on her phone, from colleagues stopping by her station with their eyes wide, from the hospital's legal counsel who called Tuesday morning to inform her that all pending action against her had been withdrawn, that the officers involved were under formal internal affairs review, and that the security footage from Suite 12 was, in the council's measured phrasing, entirely exculpatory. Cho Real Estate Holdings entered what the financial press described as an unprecedented liquidity crisis with a speed that no organic market force could explain. By Monday afternoon, 2 of the company's largest institutional lenders had simultaneously called their loans. By Tuesday morning, 3 senior board members had resigned, citing fiduciary concerns that turned out to be documented in a detailed dossier delivered simultaneously to the financial regulator, 3 investigative journalists, and the board's independent audit committee. By Wednesday, the footage of the cash envelope changing hands in the hospital corridor had been published, held by someone who understood exactly when to release it for maximum effect. Cho Hyun-suk's social infrastructure collapsed at the same speed as her financial one. The charity galas she had funded for a decade quietly uninvited her. Her lawyer's statements were immediately undermined by the emerging record. The women who had smiled at her across dinner tables for 20 years stopped returning calls. Naeun sat with this. She was not a person who found satisfaction in watching another person destroyed, even a person who had tried to destroy her. She sat with the discomfort, the awareness that what had been done on her behalf had been thorough and total, and had gone beyond anything she would have chosen herself. She thought about Seong-yoon, who had reorganized 12 men with a gesture, and about the person capable of that gesture, and about whether being grateful for the outcome meant endorsing all the means. She kept arriving at the same answer. She was not the arbiter of his world. She was a person who had to decide whether to be in it. Those were different questions entirely. By Thursday, the thing Cho Hyun-suk had tried to use as a weapon had been turned with elegant precision into the instrument of her own destruction. She had tried to ruin a nurse's life to make a point. She had ended up as the point being made. Nan was still thinking about all of it. About justice and ruin, and every woman who had ever stood in a corridor like that one, with no one watching and no elevator opening, when the doorbell rang at 8 o'clock Thursday evening. She knew before she opened it. He was alone. That surprised her more than anything else had. He stood in the corridor of her building in dark clothes, looking like himself. Impossibly, specifically himself, as if the years had refined rather than changed him. And he was holding a paper bag from the Korean-American fusion restaurant 3 streets over that she had mentioned once, in passing, to a friend 6 months ago at a work dinner. She had no reason to believe anyone connected to Baek Seong-yoon had ever attended. "I remembered you used to make that chicken stew when you or your mom were sick," he said. "I couldn't replicate it. This is the closest I could find in Seoul." Naeun looked at him for a long moment. "You cannot have my address," she said. "I know. And you cannot just appear at my door." "I know that too." "Then you're going to need to explain." "I've been looking for you," he said. "For 9 years. Since the number stopped connecting and your family's forwarding address ran out. I used every resource I had, which by the 4th year was considerable. I never found you because you changed your last name when you moved, and you built a life that didn't leave a trail back to Chicago." He paused. "I found you 6 weeks ago. I wanted you to know that." Something shifted in her chest. She had held herself very together through 4 very long days. She was not prepared for this particular sentence. "Come in," she said. "You're explaining everything. All of it." "That's a long list." "I have the rest of the evening." He stayed 3 hours that first night. They ate from the paper containers at her kitchen table, and she asked him what he had become, and he told her the truth. Not every detail, but the shape of it, the outline and the cost and the choices that could not be unchosen. He told it the way he had always told her difficult things, even at 15, quietly, watching her face, ready to stop if she needed him to. She didn't stop him. She listened the way she had always listened, fully present, genuinely there, the specific quality of attention that had always made him feel that he was worth being seen clearly. "I'm not going to pretend that's uncomplicated," she said when he finished. "I know. And I'm not going to romanticize it. I wouldn't want you to. What do you actually want, Seong-yoon? Not the reason you looked for me. What do you want now that you've found me?" He looked at her across the table. Not the memory of her. Her, the actual woman. "To know you again," he said. If that's something you're willing to consider. That would take time. I have time. It took 4 months. He did not push. And that was the thing she kept noticing. A man who had spent 9 years searching for her had apparently made his peace with moving at whatever speed she required. He appeared in her life in the specific ways she opened the door to. Coffee on Saturday mornings when her schedule permitted. Texts that were brief and sometimes dry and didn't require immediate responses. When she mentioned a certification exam she was preparing for, a message arrived a week later with the most comprehensive study resource she had ever seen. When she said she'd been meaning to visit Bukchon Hanok village, an envelope appeared in her mailbox 3 days later. A handwritten note and a reservation at a guest house at the edge of the village she hadn't known existed. He never came with the gifts. She understood the distinction immediately and she turned it over carefully, looking for the place where it became something controlling. It wasn't there. They were simply acts of attention from a man who had been paying attention for a very long time. She learned him in pieces. She learned that he cooked on Sunday mornings because his mother had. One of the habits from his first life he'd kept deliberately. A thread back to who he was before he became everything else. He was not good at it. He was methodical about it, which was different. She watched him one Sunday in month 3, consulting a handwritten recipe card in his mother's script, measuring by the card rather than by feel. And she understood something about him she hadn't before. That the things he couldn't afford to do by instinct, he did by discipline. And that the discipline was its own form of devotion. She was not trying to fall in love with him. She was trying to know him. But those things she found were not as distinct as she had assumed. The 5th month, she reached for his hand first. They were walking along the Cheongyecheon stream on a Sunday afternoon, the city folded around them, the light going that amber gold of early autumn that she had grown to love about Seoul. She was telling him about an elderly patient she'd been quietly sitting with after her shifts. No family, no visitors, just a woman who needed someone to be present with her. Not required. Simply something Naeun couldn't figure out how not to do. And she felt him listening with the quality that had always been specific to him. Fully there, understanding the thing she was actually saying rather than just the surface of the words. She reached out and took his hand without deciding to. He closed his fingers around hers and said nothing. Neither did she. They walked the rest of the path in that particular silence that is not empty but full. The light went amber, then the long blue of early evening. Neither let go. That was when she knew. Not dramatically, not with the recognizable shape of a revelation. Quietly. The way you realize partway through a long walk that you've stopped being tired. She thought, more than once, about what kind of woman falls for a man like this. The answer she kept arriving at. A woman who is not afraid of complexity. A woman who has built enough of her own life that she does not need to borrow someone else's definition of safe. She had not come to Seoul to play it small. She had not crossed an ocean and learned a language and rebuilt herself from the ground up to flinch at a man who was difficult. Difficult was honest. Difficult was real. She had no use for anything less. Then his world arrived at her hospital. 7 months in, a man appeared on her floor who didn't belong there. She clocked him in 90 seconds. The displacement was wrong, the pattern of his movement organized around finding a specific person, rather than the directionless wandering of a lost visitor. He found her at the nurse's station, set a folded piece of paper near her hand, said, "A message for Nurse Beck," without looking at her directly, and left. 4 words inside. "You know what we want." She held the note for the rest of her shift. Went home. Called Seong-yun. He arrived in 11 minutes, which meant he had been considerably closer than she'd understood him to be, and she noted that in the category of things requiring a separate conversation. He read the note once and set it down. "This is about you," Naeun said. "Someone is using me to reach you." "Yes." "Did you know this was possible?" A pause that was its own answer. "I've had people watching over you," he said, "since I found you. Without telling you." She stood up. "Excuse me. Neon, you've had people watching me. Without asking me. Without informing me. You decided, on my behalf, without any input from me, to keep you safe. That is not yours to decide." She kept her voice level. She was very good at keeping her voice level. "I am not something to be managed. I am a person who gets to make informed choices about her own life, including choices about risk. If you don't understand that, if you don't actually see me that way, then you don't know me as well as you think." Silence. "You're right," he said finally. "I was afraid," he continued. "Not of the threat, of what you'd do with the information, that you'd make the rational choice and walk away." He looked at his hands. "That's not an excuse. I know it's not." "No," she said, "it's not." She asked him to leave. 2 weeks, not for punishment. She was not interested in punishment, but because she needed to think without him in the room. She needed to know, when she answered, that she was answering from her actual self, and not from the feeling of his hand in hers on a Sunday afternoon. She was certain after 2 weeks. She called him. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." "No one watches me without my knowledge. If there's a threat, you tell me. We figure it out together. As partners, not as a protector and a protected person." "Yes. And if I'm in your world, I need to understand it. Not a sanitized version, informed. That's harder." "I know. That's why I'm asking instead of assuming." A long silence. Then, "Okay. Everything you want to know. I'll tell you." His voice was low and careful. "I'd rather have you present and informed than kept away and safe. I made the wrong choice. I won't make it again." She let out a slow breath. "I'll see you Saturday. I'll bring coffee. Bring the good coffee. Always," he said. And she could hear in that single word everything he wasn't saying yet. The things still being held carefully, still being earned. 8 months after he appeared in her corridor, Seong-yun took her to the neighborhood where he had grown up. Not the apartment he lived in now. The glass and steel of a life built deliberately far from the starting point. But the original place. Narrow streets in Gangbuk, where the buildings leaned against each other for structural support, and the restaurants had been open under the same family for 30 years, and the noise was human in the specific way that expensive neighborhoods are not. He was quiet as they walked. She let him be quiet. She had learned the textures of his silences by now. Which ones were processing? Which ones were peaceful? Which ones were asking something? This one was asking something. He stopped at a corner. An unremarkable corner. A phone repair shop on one side, a pojangmacha closed for the season on the other, a drain in the pavement older than either of them. He looked at it for a moment. "I was standing here when my mother called to tell me you'd moved," he said. "I didn't know it was coming. You'd said goodbye that morning and I thought I had more time." She stood beside him and let that land. "I tried the number," he said, "for months. Then I tried to find a forwarding address. Then the forwarding address ran out. And then..." He stopped, started again. "I made a decision. The decision that became everything else I became. And I thought about you every time I was uncertain about it. Whether you'd recognize me, whether the person you knew was still in there." Naeun looked at the corner, at the city around it, at the man beside her. "He's in there," she said. Seong-yun turned toward her. "The boy from the fire escape. He's still in there." A small tilt of her head. "He just learned how to take up more space." Something moved through his face that she had not seen before. Not the composure, not the stillness, but something underneath both of those. Something open and unguarded. The way moments arrive when you haven't prepared for them. He reached out and tucked a loose lock behind her ear. his thumb resting against her jaw, and she leaned into it without thinking. "Neon," he said. "I know," she said. "I haven't. You've been saying it for 8 months. I just needed time to be ready to hear it out loud." He laughed. A real laugh, sudden and fully present, the kind that arrived before he could decide whether to allow it. She had been waiting for that laugh. It was the one she remembered from the fire escape. "Will you stay?" he asked. Not tonight. Generally. In his life. In what they were becoming. She considered it the way she considered everything that mattered. Honestly. Without rushing. She had built a version of herself here that belonged entirely to her. She was not interested in dissolving it into someone else's story. She was interested in building something that held both. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." He kissed her on that unremarkable corner in Gangbuk, unhurried and thorough, with the particular quality of someone who had waited long enough to have no interest in rushing now. The city moved indifferently around them. The drain was still in the pavement. The Pojangmacha was still closed. Nothing remarkable. Everything changed. They married on a Saturday in late spring. A private garden in the hills above the city. 40 people, white peonies everywhere. Because she had mentioned them once, in the middle of a longer conversation about her grandmother, not as a preference, but as a passing detail. They had grown along the fence of her grandmother's house in Georgia. She had been allowed to pick exactly one each visit and carry it home. She had not thought he was listening. He had been listening. He was always listening. The morning light in the garden was clear and direct, the kind that makes everything look precisely like itself. Tresha had flown in 2 days early and was already crying before the ceremony started, which she would later deny. Nayun's mother had pulled Seongyun aside the evening before and walked him to a quieter corner and spoken to him in the direct, no-ceremony way she dealt with everything that mattered. He had listened. He had answered. Her mother had studied his face for a long moment, then patted his arm twice and let him go. When she caught Nayun's eye across the room, she gave a small, private nod. Not approval. Her mother did not traffic in approval. Acknowledgement. He was real. He was serious. He would stay. At the ceremony, Nayun spoke her vows in Korean. She had spent 3 months practicing with a tutor who had initially been baffled by the specific vocabulary she wanted and had eventually understood that this was a woman who meant to say exactly what she was going to say. Her pronunciation was imperfect. She didn't care. She watched Seongyun's face while she spoke and watched the specific thing happen that happened only for her, and she was steady all the way through. He spoke his vows in Korean and then, quietly, without anyone asking, translated himself into English, which had not been planned, which was the most thoroughly Seongyun thing he had done in 8 months. Dojin stood at the reception and said that in 15 years he had never seen Baek Seongyun afraid of anything, and that the only thing that had ever visibly broken that composure was the thought of something happening to a nurse from Chicago, and that he supposed this was what people meant when they talked about love, though he would deny having said it if asked. There was laughter. There were tears at a distance that could only be Tresha. There were Nayun's mother's tears, quiet and private, addressed with the efficiency of a woman who had not planned to cry and was handling it. Later, when the evening had gone soft and the peonies had begun to droop beautifully in the warm air, Seongyun found her at the edge of the terrace, looking out at the city lights spread below them. Seoul at night from height, dense and complicated and lit from within like something alive. He stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. They had learned to be comfortable in each other's silence, which she had decided was the most accurate test of compatibility. Not whether you can talk to someone, but whether you can be wordless with them without it becoming something that needs to be filled. "I want to do something," she said finally. "Something real, with the resources we have. Tell me. There are women, immigrant healthcare workers, foreign-born nurses, who lose their licenses and their jobs because they can't afford to fight back when someone powerful decides to make an example of them. I stood in that corridor with handcuffs on my wrists, and I had every institutional process on my side and security footage that exonerated me, and I still needed someone to step off an elevator at exactly the right second. Most women don't get that. Most women stand there alone, and they lose. She paused. I want to build something. A legal defense fund, a real network. Something that means the next woman in that corridor has someone standing with her before an elevator has to open. He was quiet beside her for a long moment. The city glittered below, indifferent and beautiful, and entirely unaware of this specific conversation happening above it. I'll have the legal structure drawn up this week, he said. The foundation, framework, the endowment. Whatever makes it sustainable without depending on my involvement in ways that could compromise it. Seong-yun. It's a necessary idea, Nayun. He turned toward her fully. You take pain and you build something from it that reaches outward. You have done this your entire life. It was the first thing I understood about you. At a bus stop in the rain, watching you share half a sandwich with a boy you didn't know because you could see he hadn't eaten. You didn't think about it. You just did it. That is what you are. He held her gaze. I have loved you since we were 15 years old, and I have never once been wrong about what you are. She felt it move through her, the full weight of everything lost and everything found. The long, strange road that had ended here on a terrace above Seoul, with white peonies and the right man, and a life finally shaped the way she had always understood it should be shaped. She took his face in her hands. She looked at him clearly, without the overlay of memory, without the caution she had built into everything for so long. Just him. Baek Seong-yun, who was complicated and dangerous and entirely hers. I love you, she said. Not who you were. Not the memory of the boy on the fire escape. You, right now, as you actually are. The parts that are difficult and the parts that aren't, and the parts I'm still figuring out. His hands came to her waist and pulled her closer. Even the complicated parts. Especially those. She felt him smile against her forehead. They're the most interesting. He kissed her in the warm spring air above the city. Slowly, without performance, with the fullness of two people who had proven they knew how to wait for what mattered and had finally, completely, decided to stop waiting. Below them, the city moved in its continuous, irrelevant way. Above, the sky had gone the deep, clear blue of a spring night when the heat hasn't arrived yet and everything seems, briefly, suspended in the best possible version of itself. Naunbaek had stood in handcuffs in a hospital corridor and kept her chin up. She had crossed an ocean with a one-way ticket and rebuilt herself in a second language, in a city that was not her own, and made it hers anyway. She had refused to be made small in every room that tried. She had stood at the edge of being destroyed and not broken. That was hers. That was always going to be hers. This was different. This was chosen. Freely, clearly, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it was worth. She pressed her face against his shoulder and felt his arms close around her, solid and certain. She was keeping this. If you stayed until the very end of this story, thank you. From that hospital corridor to this terrace above Seoul, thank you for every moment you stayed. If Naeun and Seong-yun moved you, if some part of you believes in the love that doesn't expire, that only waits, patient and buried for the exact right moment. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel for new Afro-Korean romance stories every single week. And comment below and tell me, which moment stayed with you the longest? Was it the corridor? The corner in Gangbuk? The hand reaching out along the stream? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Until then, keep believing in the love that comes back.